Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we are going to begin our journey into doing scientific observations. Now, the scientific observations I'm talking about today are geared towards Montessori teacher training. However, today we're going to start at the very beginning, and this is so we can get used to the idea of approaching scientific observation. So the lessons that I'm working on today, while they're geared towards people who are going through Montessori training or towards teachers, really you can reformat all of these examples that we're going to go through today and rework them into lesson plans if you have older children like middle school or high school students. You know, everything we're doing today really can be for anyone. And this is really important because I feel like we've really lost our way when it comes to scientific observation. It feels more and more that we have an assumption, we have a thought, we have already made up our mind on something, and then we kind of move backwards through the scientific method to prove what we have already decided on was true. So what we're going to do today is really focus on not making assumptions. We're going to focus on not coming at this from the perspective of you already know something or that you really just want to prove yourself right about something. We're going to just stand back, pull ourselves back, focus on details, focus on facts, and we're really going to work on putting our feelings and assumptions to the side. That's really where we're going to begin with understanding the idea of observation. Honestly, observations are not easy. It's amazing how difficult it can be to train your mind not to make an assumption. Which brings me to the most important rule of observations, and that is don't fill in the blanks with imagination. So let me explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. To understand what it is that I'm talking about here, let's talk about the goal of observation. So your goal, and I'm just going to quote what my training center said to me, the goal is to observe with a scientific eye and record exactly what is happening in its particular environment. So you are striving to cultivate the ability to objectively observe, record, and subsequently synthesize the material. You need to make every effort to keep your observations scientific and record only what you perceive through your senses. So our minds are fascinating things. Our brains are fascinating things. Without even noticing it, it fills in all the blanks with imagination, with abstract thought. And this can create a lot of problems because we make an assumption about something instead of collecting the data, instead of collecting the information, instead of collecting the details about what's going on, can sometimes come to the wrong conclusion. But even if you come to the correct conclusion, if you don't have the details to back you up, how are you supposed to have a conversation with, let's say, parents, right? How are you supposed to bring something to the attention of parents that's going on with the child or within the classroom if you don't have the details, right? And perhaps when you take those details and you present them to parents or maybe an occupational therapist or even administration, perhaps if you just bring the details, they might see something different in the details than what you've seen. And that can really open up a lot of discussion and potential solutions that maybe you had closed your mind to or weren't aware of before. So it's really good for us not to have our feelings and assumptions take center stage in our observations, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives. We have to remember the observation is very sensorial. Whatever sense you are using to make your observation, that needs to be the only one you use. So what I mean by that is if you are only using the sense of sight, then that's the only one you can write about. If you are using the sense of sound, you can write about sound if you hear something, right? If you see something and you start writing about how it feels, but you're not touching it, then that would be a subjective thought. That's a feeling, that's an assumption, right? You're filling in the gaps with imagination. And we don't want to do that. So be aware of the senses you're using for your observation, and be aware of the fact that if you're not using that sense, you can't write about it. And one way they described it to me in training is you need to kind of pretend to be an alien. Let's pretend you're new here to this world. Let's pretend that everything in this world is new to you. You don't know what anything is. And that might help put you in the mindset that you're really just in a place where everything is foreign to you. And that can be really hard to do. It can be really difficult to come into a situation and recognize objects and make an assumption because you're familiar with them. And so I challenge you, as you're starting down this road of observation, find some things that you don't know, that you don't recognize. Find some unfamiliar things and see how that feels in comparison to writing about something that's very familiar. These beginning observational exercises are not about having a hypothesis. This is simply data collection. What we're starting today with is simply information gathering. And when you gather that information later on, maybe in a couple weeks, you might come up with a hypothesis about something. And then you'll use further observation or further scientific studies to work through the scientific method. But today, I really want to focus on the fact that this exercise, the exercises we're going through today, are not to have a hypothesis about anything. This is really about coming at everything with a blank slate, with a blank mind, and just working our way through collecting data in an objective way and setting those subjective thoughts, those feelings and assumptions aside. So with that being said, let's jump into the format of an observational journal. And I am going to be giving you this blank template to look at, to use. Maybe you want to get your own notebook and copy this. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to give you some examples from my training. I'm going to give you examples of what I went through during training. We're going to start out with an unidentified object that I am only looking at in a sensorial way of sight. You know, it wasn't something I could hear, touch, taste, feel, none of that stuff. And then we'll do an object study where I use more than one sense, more than just the sense of sight. And then we're going to talk about plant observations. And then lastly, we're going to go into the zoo observation that I did. So we're going to go through this journey of doing different exercises before we start getting into the more complex classroom observations. So let's start with the first page of the template for an observation journal. At the top, you're going to notice that there's a table that says date, place, weather, mood, health. It's really important to start every observation off with the time, the place, the weather, the mood that you are in, and also be aware of your health, right? All of these things are observations you need to have to be aware of yourself. And that's going to help you decide whether or not you're coming at this observation in a healthy way, in a healthy manner, or if perhaps, something is affecting how you are observing the environment. So that's the first step. And then when it comes to actually observing, you're going to have a table that has the time, and you're going to have a column for objective facts, the details. That's what we really want here, and that's what we're going for. But learning to be objective is really difficult. Learning to stick with the facts only is really difficult. So we're going to have another column to the right for subjective thoughts. These are your feelings and assumptions. And when something pops up that's a feeling, that's an assumption, we're going to acknowledge it. We're not going to just dismiss it. We're going to write it down. If all of a sudden you start feeling frustrated, if you start feeling tired, or if you jump to a conclusion that you can't prove, then you're going to put it down in this column. You know, this is the extra information going on in the environment that's not an objective fact. Now, the examples I'm going to show you today of what I've done, you know, they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be great pieces of literature. I'm also going to show some of the diagrams I did, and I'll just warn you, I did not go to art school, you know, so I'm not going to show you perfection. I'm also going to include some of the notes that my trainer wrote in my observation journal, some criticisms and corrections that they made to me, because I really want you to see that it's difficult. And other people, some people are going to be really good at this and some people are going to really struggle. I have to say, it's difficult for me. It is a skill that we need to practice. The next part of the observation journal, and this isn't going to be in every single observation, we're going to work our way to it, but eventually we're going to start including diagrams. So you're going to want to have a section for your observations for diagrams. We're going to work our way to that. The first observations that we're going to do are not going to have diagrams. So this isn't going to be something you have to include every time, and it's not something we're going to start out with, but eventually we are going to start putting some diagrams in because that is part of observational study. And this last part I want to go over is the scientific information when we're doing nature observations. We're going to collect scientific data after the observation. Whatever it is we're studying, we want to go back and we want to find the information of all the scientific data and any relevant information after we finish our observations. So we're going to want to look up a scientific name or a common name, as well as the origin, natural habitat status, other information. So that's something when you get into some of the deeper observational studies, some of those exercises, we're going to also add this element in. Okay, so let's go to my first example of doing an observation when I was going to Montessori training. So I have the date there, it's June 19th. Where am I at? I'm in the MISD parking lot under a large white tent. The weather, well, it's June in San Diego, so it's cloudy and it's warm with a cool breeze. We got the June gloom going on. My mood at the time was calm and awake, and my health, I felt healthy that day. And so right here, we're going to start the observation. This is a timed observation. So the timing started at 2:33 in the afternoon and ended at 2:40. So you can see the time span for this first observation, and it's a very short, very simple observation. And here's what I wrote at the beginning of the observation. And I wrote, a black object is on the ground. It is a material that is thin, folded, and wrinkled. The fabric is about 2 feet in length in one direction and 1 foot in length in the other direction. And right here, I'm going to pause. Because the critique I got from my trainer on this one, so my trainer looked at my observation journal and wrote this criticism of me. Did you measure it? So that she felt was more of a subjective comment, and that should have been moved to the subjective column. And then I go on to write, the fabric is in a triangular shape with one side longer, narrowing into a point. A fabric piece, long and rectangular, is protruding from the larger piece of fabric. It is on the right side, about 6 inches long. There is a 2-inch square sewn by stitching thread by the part of the fabric that has narrowed to a point. So that's what I wrote for objective facts. Those are the things I tried to capture in the objective column. Now let's take a look at what I wrote in the subjective column as I go along. See, my brain's already trying to fill in the gaps with imagination. Is it an apron? Is it a tie? And you know what? You want to know what it is? I have no idea. I can't remember. I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm reading this and I'm like, I remember doing this observation. I do not remember what the object was. So how sad is that? Apparently my descriptions weren't good enough to recall what the object was. But in a sense, you know, this was a good observation because honestly, I really couldn't tell the way it was laying down, uh, the way it was on the ground. I couldn't exactly tell what this object was. All I could do was write about the details. And already my brain's trying to guess, is it this? Is it that? You know, and you're going to find that when you don't know what something is, your mind is going to keep trying to fill in the gaps with imagination. Don't let it do that. Understand that's a subjective thing. All we're caring about right here is objective, the facts, the details, what we can actually know through the sense that we are using. And how many senses did I use in this observation? I couldn't hear it, I couldn't touch it, I couldn't taste it, right? I could only see it. So I could only write about the things that I could see, and I could only use descriptive words that I could find that matched the details that I saw. In someone else's perspective, where someone else was sitting, we were all sitting in a circle around this object. Somebody else sitting across the circle from me may have had a totally different viewpoint and experience of sight for this object. And I really wish I knew what it was. I really can't remember. So apparently I need to get better at my descriptive skills. So with that being said, let's move on to my second journal exercise that I went through in training. So the next observation I did was on June 21st. Again, we're in the MISD parking lot under the tent. It's still June, so it's still cloudy in San Diego, and it was still cool. And my mood that day, notice I put nervous that day. I don't remember why I was nervous, but I felt nervous. You know, there's a lot going on when you're going to training, but I did feel healthy. Here is the second observational study that we did. And in this study, we had a table full of objects. And so when we are, again, we are in a group circle around this table. There's several objects on the table. There are several things to look at. So this makes it a little bit difficult, right? This makes it a little bit more challenging. And so at 2:30, we start our observations. And as you can see at the end, it stops at 2:47. So again, it's another timed observation. And this is how I start out writing about the observation. The object is red and round. Perhaps it's more oblong. A round indent is in the middle of the object on the left side. Inside the indent is a brown stick-like object that protrudes. It is smaller than the object and it is skinny. The right side of the object has an indent between two bumps. The object sits on a small child-sized table on the right corner. It has stripes that lightly alternate between dark red and medium red. The indent in the middle of the object on the left side is slightly yellowish green. And then I go on to say there are several other objects on the table near this round object. Each object can be picked up by hand. I'm going to stop for a second because in the right-hand column, I wrote a question next to this comment and I said, is this subjective, right? My question was this subjective? Each object can be picked up by hand. Is this a subjective comment? And my trainer goes, yes, that was her response. So that, because I didn't pick it up by hand, has to go in the subjective column, right? Like that's an assumption. And to go back to that first paragraph where I'm writing about this object that is red and round, my mind instantly goes to fill in the blanks with imagination and I say, it's an apple. I can't help it. I look at the object and I just say, apple. I know that's an apple. It has to be an apple, but we can't use that in our description. You know, maybe it's something that looks like an apple, but it's not an apple. So we can't use that in our description. We can only describe what it looks like through our sense of sight. I can't touch it, I can't smell it, I can't feel it, I can't taste it, I can't do any of that. So we're not going to use the word apple in our description. That's subjective, put it to the side. So let's continue on. I counted 14 objects that I can see. There is a round spherical object on the left corner of the table. It is dark blue with black pentagons. The light reflects off the shiny sphere. And right here, I have a subjective thought. It's a soccer ball, right? Your brain instantly goes to what you think it is. It instantly wants to answer the question, what is this? But we're not going to do that. We are going to only use descriptions. We're not going to use labels. So the last paragraph I write, to the left of the sphere is a clear cylindrical object in a white cloth bag. the object in the bag is open on one side. To the right of the cylindrical object and further back from the blue spherical object is an object that is shaped like a triangular prism. There is a bottom on the prism and a triangular wall with an opening on the other side. And to the right in the subjective column, that object that is cylindrical, in my mind, I say cup. That's a cup. I recognize that. That's a cup or a glass. And then down at the bottom for the triangular shaped object, I say, it looks like a box. And so you can see here that my brain is constantly wanting to make those assumptions. It wants to go to the labels and skip the descriptions and skip the facts. I really want to interpret what I'm seeing based on what I've experienced and what I've known before. And the key to good scientific data, good scientific observation, is pulling back from those desires to write about the things that we assume are true and skip over the details. If you skip over the details, you're going to miss something important. And the details will always help you. They'll help you if you're right, but they'll also help you if you're wrong. Staying away from assumptions is the best thing you can do in your scientific exercises. Let's go to the next one. So here in this observation, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. There's something different that happens in this observation. I am going to do an observation, but this time I get to interact with the object. So the date is July 3rd. I am in the MISD CASA, Primary 1 CASA practice room, and the weather is cool, and there's dim light in the room. My mood is tired, but I'm still feeling healthy. So right here, everybody was given a variation of the same object. And I'm going to break this up into how I used my different sensory observations. Again, it is a timed observation. We started at 11:50, ended at 12:02. And so for the first part of this observation, here's what I wrote in the objective column. The object that I have is spherical and yellow. Half of the object is light yellow, half of it is a darker yellow. The object has two small points protruding from each end. On each of the 2 points, there are 2 dots, a darker brown color. Around the darker brown colored dots, the color of the yellow object turns slightly green. The object has small dots that are dark yellow. The object reflects some light on its surface. There are smaller light brown spots all over the yellow object. So that was my observation of sight right there, right? But I'm also allowed to touch it. So this is what I wrote about my sensory observation for touch. And I said the object can be picked up with one hand. Oh, I'm missing the word hand there. The object can be picked up with one hand. Now this is objective, where before it was subjective, right? I couldn't touch the object that I saw before, so that was subjective. But here I'm actually picking it up with one hand. So this is an objective observation. And I write, it is smooth with granular bumps. It has lumps and is slightly cooler than the room temperature. So there is my observation of touch. And then finally, I have a sensory observation of smell, and I write the object has an earthy citrus smell. Now, what is it? My mind filled in the blank. I already knew what this object was before they gave it to me. At least I assumed I knew what it was, right? It's a lemon. So everybody got a lemon. They got a different lemon. And I actually went through this exercise in early childhood education. So this is actually something that we did do in my university studies. So I was actually familiar with what was going to happen next. So everybody had their lemon and they put it back into the basket. And then we all had to come up one at a time and find the lemon that we wrote the description about. But we didn't just write a description for this one. This is where we also started including diagrams. And so we wrote this description, we drew a diagram, and then we had to put all of our lemons back in the basket and go find our particular lemon when we were done. And hopefully, if our observation skills were good enough, if we really paid attention to the details, we could find our lemon, our specific lemon. And I did find my lemon. You know what? Because I paid attention to my details and I had drawn a picture. And I'm just going to prepare you for the fact that I am going to share my drawing of my lemon. Now, I want to just say I have never been to art school, not a natural artist. And so I just want to prepare you to be in awe of my drawing capabilities. And here is my lemon. I know, it's amazing. Never went to art school, can you believe it? But there's my lemon. So anyways, that is an example of doing an object study with a description where you can interact with the object and also draw a diagram. So keep in mind that we are going through this just like we do any Montessori lesson of each of these exercises are an isolation of difficulty. We are building to something. We are building from simple to complex. We are building one skill at a time, and we are slowly starting to include more steps in our exercises. So this particular scientific study, we're interacting with the object, we're using more than one sense, and we're also drawing a diagram. And before we get on to the next study, I just want to tell you, if you go through Montessori training and you do the lemon study or whatever it is, whatever object they do for you, um, a lot of us keep our lemons or whatever it is that they hand us. And I did keep my lemon. I put a nice little smiley face on my lemon and I took it for a walk because Montessori training will kind of make you go crazy. And at that point in the summer, I was really missing my dogs. I mean, I missed my family too, right? But I really missed my dogs at this point in time. So I took my lemon for a walk around campus. And there's my lemon at the University of San Diego campus. He's a very happy lemon. So anyways, if you've been to Montessori training and you've done this exercise and you had a lemon or whatever you had, you can always let me know down below. What'd you do with yours? Did you just throw it away or did you put a smiley face on it and take it for a walk? Because at that point in time, you might have been going just a little bit crazy. Let me know, comment down below if you were going a little bit crazy, just like me. And you know what? Sometimes you just need a friend during training, and sometimes that friend is a real lemon. All right, so looking at the time, I see that this video is getting pretty long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop right here. We have done our introduction with 3 object observations, and I am going to come back in a second video and do the plant observation and zoo observation separately. So all of that is already recorded. I just need to edit it and then I can upload the plant observation and zoo observations. So we're going to just stop for right now, add our lemon, and I'll come back with the part 2 in a few days. So with that being said, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in part 2 of our introduction to observations.